So we do want to thank you all for showing up early. We do have an activity that we want people to do as they come in. So one, we want you to kind of just read some of the quotes from student voices on the wall. They're on the back. We have some Post-it notes in the back. You can take pens, and we really just want you to be able to put Post-it notes that can answer the top row on the bigger sheets for community stewardship, completion, etc. So sticky notes in the back. Just take a look at what the question is and pop some answers on. Welcome everybody to my first President's Cabinet retreat as president. I'm very excited about the space that we've created today. We have thought long and hard about this moment and what we wanted this moment to be and to represent. And so I'm excited to get into all of that. But first, we do have a little bit of business that we need to take care of. And so everybody who was a part of President's Cabinet received a student equity plan. And so we've asked people to review it. We probably sent it several times for people to review it. And we needed that to be our first reading. And then today is going to be our second reading where we take a vote in hopes of approving the plan. And so what we're going to do is ask Larry to come up. And he's going to do a quick overview, see if you all have any questions, and then we'll move to a vote if we get to that point.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be able to produce the fruitage of the hard work that is going into developing the 2022-2025 Student Equity Plan. And I'm just going to real quickly go through a brief overview of some high-level aspects of the plan. All of you have had the opportunity to consider the actual plan, the executive summary, as well as this PowerPoint presentation that has been put together that discusses the plan. The metrics that we are using for the plan are the vision for success, and that's certainly in harmony with the state's efforts to use those metrics in helping us to determine how we're going to go about eliminating equity gaps amongst our disproportionately impacted student groups. The plan highlights our commitment that we view students from an asset-based perspective, that we view our work through an equity lens, and that we are committed to addressing and eliminating the systemic barriers that have been confronting our students for so many years. We always lead with our definition of equity, because this is work that took place across the entire campus. It is something that we can come back to. It is something that we can all draw from, and it acknowledges and respects the work that the college has been initiating around equity for so long. Our targeted groups are traditional groups that we highlighted initially in 2014. For every metric, we see that we're going to focus in enrollment on Black, African American, Latinx, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and or Pacific Islander. We see the transfer level metrics and the disproportionately impacted groups there. We see the detention, completion, and transfer. So this honors the long-standing disproportionately impacted groups that we have been working with over time. So in terms of our goal, coming out of COVID, we recognize that the importance of helping our students to have a sense of belonging, sense of community. So we decided to focus our goals around helping to build community and supporting our disproportionately impacted student groups. And we're going to use qualitative measures and means to help us to see whether or not we're doing that effectively. And then in our third year, we're going to look to decrease the equity gaps for each of those cohorts by at least 5%. So that is our goal. So that gives us some time to get reacclimated into our on-campus learning environment, to being face-to-face with our students once again, but of course being intentional about developing those communities in those spaces. Our activities, and I will mention that we initially highlighted 4, however, when we sent out the plan back and we decided to add an additional effort, and that is to leverage our STEM 3 grant as well as our Anapesi grant to support our Latinx and our API students. So in this first one, creating inclusive spaces, that is one of our one of our objectives or our goals, and all of them tie back to our Mesa 2030 roadmap. So creating inclusive spaces is one of our goals. The loft is one of our activities that we will continue to support. And then, of course, our STAND Basic Needs Center, guided pathways, and then we've added leveraging our STEM 3 grant and our Anapesi grant. So those are going to be our 5 efforts that we're going to focus on. Are those all the things that we're going to be doing across the campus to support DI groups? No, not at all. But as part of the equity initiative specifically, we're going to focus on those 5 key areas. And the actual presentation, the executive summary, the presentation, as well as the plan has been updated with those inclusions. The plan asks us to talk about things that impede equitable outcomes. We highlighted, of course, COVID had a huge impact in our work. The lack of focus over time on race. We began to kind of water down our approach to equity, and we got away from race. And then we also lacked an institutional scope to the plan. And so those were the 3 areas that we identified as reasons or areas in which we need to improve in order to truly eliminate those equity gaps. And then so conversely, we talked about what we were going to focus on that was going to help us to undo that. So we're going to use and leverage the COVID situation and the various resources that have come into our community to help us to create those spaces for our students. We are also going to now not be race neutral. We're going to focus on our Black students, our Latinx students, and our Pacific Islanders. As you read the equity plan, you note that throughout the plan, we highlight specific activities as well as equity sightings associated with supporting those groups. And then we're going to have a broad institutional scope of focus. And that means that we're going to tie into the work that has already been accomplished on the campus. Mesa 2030, Mesa 2030 roadmap, guided pathways, our Anapesi grant, our STEM 3 grant. You see all of this beautiful work that is taking place, we need to leverage that because that work is already rooted in equity. So why should we divert from that? And why not leverage that to help us to have that institutional focus and scope on our work? And you'll notice that in the plan as well. And then, so our action steps, kind of highlighted there what I just mentioned. And so those are the high level things associated with the plan. I wanted to get through that quickly for the purposes of our retreat today. Are there any questions or comments on anything that I've said or what you read? Any concerns, issues? Yes?
Yeah, I'm a little confused on the measurement outputs. The first time I see it, I believe it's page 7 and 7. Yeah, page 7.
Mm-hmm.
The measurement outputs in the first 2 time frames measured sense of belonging using survey data. But afterwards, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just an oversight, there's no indication of what's being measured later. So
Okay.
if I turn to page 12, target outcomes, measurement output, it just says Hispanic, Latin, Latino, AX, Black or African American measured by survey. Well, what's being measured by the survey?
Right.
So I don't know if it was just an accident that it got dropped out or what.
Probably.
But the
Yeah.
rest of the document repeats that same mistake.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and correct that.
Yeah,
for
it was a little
sure.
confusing. I said, well, what's being measured? Is it still the sense of belonging? Is there something else that's being measured? It
Yeah.
wasn't quite clear. On the
Okay.
other hand, the third one, the third year, it almost always is correct, same retention increased by 5%.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's supposed to reflect the actual measure for that actual category. So if it's retention, if it's sense of belonging, if it's whatever, so we will fix that. We will get that oversight done. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So some of y'all did read it. Okay. Nice. Beautiful. Any other input?
I have other grammar comments.
Please add those as well. And let me say this. The nice thing about this plan is that it's designed to be a living document, which allows us to update it ongoing and regularly. It's not a snapshot document as previous plans have been. So please, yes, if you see grammar, if you see things that lack consistency, please share that. We have gotten some of that feedback. We have added based upon the feedback that we've gotten. So absolutely, please do that. Thank you. Anything else? Okay.
Okay, so Beth, in order to help Beth, because we do need to record a vote for this, if you are a voting member on PCAP, can you raise your hand? Beth, do you want to get a count?
2, 3, 4,
I'm just gonna
7, 8. We have 9, 10, 11. Okay.
Okay, and so is there a motion to approve the student equity plan? Somebody want to? Oh, I see hands. I think I saw Loren's hand go first. So first motion by Lorenz, and then a second? You guys are so quiet. Let's shout out who the second, so Beth could get the information.
John?
I'm sorry, I can't, everybody's going, I'm laughing, like, I'm looking at you, but I don't think your hand was the first to go, but, okay. Okay, so then let's do a vote, so all in favor, raise your hand.
Appoint a proxy for Mary.
Oh, okay, let's do that. Okay, any nays? Any abstentions? All right, congratulations, thank you. And the whole committee for all your work. Okay, so what we want to do now, and I know there's a present mode, but I can't figure out what it is. So we'll just leave it like this. Okay, so I want to be able to talk about why it is that we're here today. And I do thank you all for carving time out of your busy schedules to be in community. It is very important for me to bring us all back together in spaces as often as we can, when we can, especially when it comes to the work of the college, the work of being the leading college of equity and excellence, and talking about how we will move towards that very ambitious and important goal. So one of the things, as you all know, we have 2 retreats per year. And the first retreat really is to assess the effectiveness of our mission, right, and our vision, which is why we wanted to make sure that everybody made it around to kind of see the data, to see some key data where we are, because this is what we need to keep in mind as we make those decisions. So I saw a lot of people taking a look, having some conversations. What are some of the things that popped out about the data to you all?
I guess that Black and African Americans still lagging behind in terms of performance.
Okay, say that a little bit louder.
Is Black and African Americans still lagging behind in terms of performance?
Okay, so Black and African American students are still continue to lag behind. And we can say in terms of performance, we can say in terms of the way that we are providing services, so that is not a deficit-minded factor, but we're thinking about there's something that we are not doing to help support our Black and brown students. Because if we didn't believe that to be true, we would look and say this is the best that our Black and brown students can do. And I would hope that nobody in this room believes that to be true. And if that is not true, then that puts the work and responsibility on us. So we wanted to make sure that we are grounded in this data. Did anything else stand out for anyone as they looked at the data? One of the key things too about this, and we want to show this, is to demonstrate that if anyone in this room thinks that we have the answers, that we have been doing all that we can. If there's anyone in this room who is dedicated and committed to holding on to old practices and behaviors and ways of doing things and not releasing that grip to demonstrate that there is room for improvement, we put this data on the wall to say that there is room for all of us to re-envision, to disrupt, to reimagine, to rethink how it is that we're serving our students. We also wanted to bring student voices into the room. And so hopefully you had the chance and the opportunity, to read some of those voices. And we had the opportunity to share some of these before. So one student said, so many students, especially students of color, don't graduate every year because of roadblocks and challenges they face every year. Addressing issues such as anti-Blackness promotes a sense of community and fosters growth all around. Another student said, we are fighting racism every day and taking courage to stand up for ourselves. Are we doing the same to stand up for those students? Another student says representation is very important in the education system. We need classes with all kinds of professors, Asian, Latinx. I can't differentiate goodness based on the color of the skin. Still, with white professors, the materials they use are different. Why is it so different than with the Mexican professors? It's as if there are two worlds. Why? I'm taking Black history classes. It's empowering for me because they are showing the strengths of the Native Americans and Black people. Another student said, my professor was just really aggressive. Whenever I asked a question in class and they announced my mistake to the entire class and made me feel embarrassed. And finally, a student said, everyone needs to be aware of injustices and have conversations about it. And so today, we are going to have conversations about injustices and begin to practice ways that we can do something about each of these areas. Okay, here we go. So, well, actually, I should probably go over the agenda with you, right? So this is welcoming and setting context. We're gonna have a brief conversation about principals community. Then we're gonna do some breakout case study discussion. We have some ways that we are going to present information so that we can practice what it looks like to be courageous, practice what it looks like to disrupt things that are not right, that are not just, that serve as roadblocks, that go against the things that we believe and say who we are as a college of equity and excellence. We're gonna do a couple of those activities. We're gonna talk about leadership, courageous leadership, which is something that has really been on my heart for this year, to figure out how it is that we can not only lead, but how we lead with courage, and how we passionately pursue equity and excellence in everything that we do, knowing that requires us to be vulnerable, that requires us to do things that we are uncomfortable with, but it is a requirement if we are going to be the leading college of equity and excellence. And then we're gonna wrap up and do some commitments. So in terms of context, looks like a couple of slides didn't make it in. So what I want to share about context, a couple of things that we're going to do. We're going to focus on equity and excellence. That is going to be key and core to what it is that we do. That is our vision. That should be every way that we talk about things, it's the lens. We are going to focus on equity talk to equity walk. And a few years ago, we really kind of jumped into this book and talked about it, right? And so what I believe is that on campus, like we all have this vision, we understand it. We can talk about what equity and excellence looks like. But when it comes to practicing it in uncomfortable situations, we have been told that that's difficult. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to kind of let things slide, let them go. Because it's easier to deal with that as opposed to deal with some of the vulnerabilities, some of the things that come along with us being people who really walk the talk. So we're gonna give an opportunity to be able to demonstrate what it looks like to just talking about equity, but really walking it out in action. We're gonna focus again on courageous leadership. So one of the things that I shared before is that we had conversations with some of our leaders on the team. We talked about what it means to be a courageous leader. We had 8 different elements. And we asked, what were the 1 or 2 things that we struggle with when it comes to being courageous leaders? And the one thing that seemed to be at the top of everyone's list was the ability to have difficult conversations. And so you can only imagine, like, how can we be the leading college of equity and excellence when equity clearly is something that we have to work hard towards, when what we have been doing has not produced equity? If we cannot have conversations about what it is that we are doing to hold the mirror up to who we are, to really pause and reflect on the possibilities that exist with our words, with our actions. If we cannot do that, if we don't have spaces, I want to say safe, but it doesn't always feel safe. But if we don't have those spaces, then how will we ever address the data that is before us? It's going to take some critical, courageous, difficult conversations. And what we know is that we don't always feel comfortable doing that. And so we want to create space for that to be. Today is about our students. Today is about our students. This is greater good work. And while you are a person who will help us to get to that point, this is not about you. This is about our students. And this is also about our community. And one of the things that I've been hearing as I've been doing our listening and learning tour, one, I have to acknowledge that there's some excellent and very exciting work that has taken place. But there are also some concerns that have proven to be barriers and challenges. And one, as you talked about, was our return from COVID. It is almost as with these last 2 years that we lost a little something in terms of being civil, in terms of how we talk to each other, in terms of how we treat each other. And there are people who are being impacted by the words that we say, by the words we are not saying, and how we are showing up in the spaces. And so this is about us being together, remembering our humanity, and understanding that words matter. That we are either building people up or tearing them down with our words. And so I want to make sure that our community can get back to being a community that honors civility, that honors humanity, that sees each other. You all know I love the phrase sawubona. Sawubona is an African greeting. Where here we'll say, hey, how you doing? And before somebody can tell you, we're off. You know what I mean? Because we say it, but there's really not much behind it. But sawubona says, I see you. I see you. I see you. And I value what you bring. I value your experience. And then the response, I can't remember how you say it, but the response is, then I exist for you. Can you imagine entering into a classroom space where a student feels seen and says that as a result of feeling seen, I am here for you. We are in partnership. Let's work, let's learn, let's grow. Can you imagine walking up to a counter, a front desk, and the person seeing you? And then they say, then I am here for you. Let's work through this, let's figure it. It is a whole different way to show up. And so when we are here together, we can literally see each other. And then I want us to get back to existing for one another and existing for our vision of being the leading college of equity and excellence. So today, as we move through these activities, I'm going to encourage you to be bold, to be courageous, to have the courage of your conviction as you are having these conversations, to really focus on doing what is right. And the thing that I will close with says, it's a quote that I actually heard this morning. I thought it was really apropos for what we were doing. It says, between stimulus, right? So we may hear something, it may cause a reaction in us. So between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose how we respond. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So today, as we engage these opportunities, as we engage each other, I would encourage you to create space between how something feels when you hear it, and then choose how to respond. And in this space at Mesa College, I hope that your choice is rooted in equity and excellence, in humanity, in civility, and student success. And then realize that in that choice, you are able to grow, you are holding yourselves accountable, you are holding other people accountable, and there's freedom in that. And that freedom will be felt by our students. There will be freedom to succeed, freedom to belong, freedom to show up as their full selves. And it is my sincere hope that that is what all of us want. So some of the spaces that we create today may be uncomfortable, and that is intentional. And my thought is often, many of us experience life and we're very uncomfortable with things that happen, but we don't say anything because we don't want to disrupt. But my thought as I mature is that if we're going to be uncomfortable, we're going to be uncomfortable in a direction towards progress. So we all going to be uncomfortable. But it is going to be for the sake of equity and excellence. So that is the space that I ask you all to show up in today. Because equity is a practice, equity is a lifestyle, it is a way of being, And if we do not pause and do this intentionally, this data will never change. And it must. It has to. We can be better for our students. So I want to thank our executive leadership team for kind of toying around with what it is that we wanted to do. And then I especially want to thank Bridget and Janae and Larry for taking it deeper and then coming back and then saying, I think we can go deeper. And so I want to thank them for that. And I want to thank you in advance for doing the same. So next, that's what's great.
So yes, so this discussion really ties in with the next piece where we're going to consider some case studies. But I did want to just highlight the principles of community. I'll give a brief refresher on that work. There was a group of us that was put together out of a PCAP meeting, a task force that came together to develop some principles of community around how we engage with one another. And as I hear our president talk about courageous leadership, what I'm thinking is that perhaps at no time ever are these principles of community more important, because they highlight the ways in which we go about doing this work. And so what we are asking you to do is to assume that we as a community, as a college, have accepted these principles of agreement, right? And as we juxtapose them next to these various case studies that we're going to consider, there's a question in there about how might principles of community impact the way that we respond to a particular matter or a particular case. I also just want to briefly note that the work of putting this together was done across the campus by faculty, by classified professionals and administrators who worked very hard to develop these. And so we really, as a committee, we believe in them. You'll notice that there are some printouts and that have the explanations. We are still accepting feedback on those, but for purposes of today's activity, we want to assume that we have accepted them as is, and we want you to dialogue around how they might impact the way that we view these various case studies that we're going to ask you to consider, okay? So any questions, thoughts or questions on that? Beautiful. Okay, so if I might invite up Janae to lead us in our case study work.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome. And so, good afternoon. Y'all can't be all dry like that. Y'all can't do that to me. I'm gonna say it again. Good afternoon. Yes, it's a little news yet, right? So the case studies are on the table, and I just put one, and I have other extra copies so I can come around and put some more down for you. So the way that we would do this, there's only 4, and so if you look, you have a whole packet on your table. So what we can do is count off tables, and then based on your number is the case study that you will read. And so when you go through the case studies, they're very short. There's just some reflection questions. And so if you all can just dialogue and talk, I'll set a timer. And so we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes where you can actually read, and then in that 10 to 15 minutes discuss it. And then we want to open up some space for you all to just to share out from some of your thoughts and ideas that emerged through your conversation about how you would address it. And then I would just follow up by sharing some recommendations. So all of these cases, except for one, are from Equity Talk to Equity Walk. And so some of you may have that book, so if you wanted to refer back to it, you can. But I just added some of the content from what recommendations they provide in the text, and then I put them on another document. So you can kind of refer to see what your notes were, and then kind of what the book says. So I just want to start with the count off, so you can select your case study. So this would be table 1.
2, 3, 4, 5.
No, so start at 1 again for me. So where you said 5, you'll be 1.
1.
Okay. And then
2.
okay.
Sure. 3.
Over here. 1. Okay. And then 2, where Jill is. 3, where Isabel is. Okay. So did everybody have their number? Okay. So I'll set a timer and please go through. Thanks, Johanna. I couldn't remember the clap. Okay.
If you hear me, clap once.
Thank you. So this is a time, I have a microphone. I would just walk around if you would like to, just on the behalf of your table, share what the case study was and then some insights that you had. You can share if there was a principle of community that you believe. So you can just share the insights, anything that you felt was connected to one of the principles of community and any other things that came up. So I just want to open it up and I can share the mic so that it can be, if you're not using your inside voice, or I can't think of how they say it. If you don't have a voice like Johanna, then you might want to use the microphone. Okay, so anyone would like to share first? Any tables?
Are we going over?
Yes, here we go.
Oh, no.
I didn't volunteer. Okay, good.
Testing, excellent. Okay, we had case study 1, which is subtitled Claiming Not to See Race, and to paraphrase, it dealt with a counselor who had noticed a trend among African American and Latinx students that they weren't progressing to the next level of their math courses. She brings this to a campus-wide discussion forum, and the responses from faculty, as stated in the case study, are broadly dismissive on a number of different angles towards this issue. And some of the things that we noticed about that were that the faculty didn't seem to be recognizing their students as individuals with individual situations and needs. One of the things that was said was, this has nothing to do with race. Another was, I teach students, I don't care what color they are. And then a third one, which was maybe these students are not predisposed to doing well in these courses. And it's worth pointing out right now that that one is absolutely wrong. Saying that a group of people is not predisposed to succeed in any area is a big part of what racism is, and that deserves a significant amount of pushback on its own right there. But there were other things worthy of notice. For instance, one of the first response, which was that this has nothing to do with race, clearly does. The data specifically indicates that this is a race-based equity gap. And so to claim that it's not based on race when you see that data is, I guess, at best unhelpful. There were many, many other things we noticed, but just so that we don't stick on that one too long, we also, it was fairly clear to see that the dismissive response to this gap in African American and Latinx students advancing in math courses was that they're not receiving the support that they need, clearly, and the response is indicating that they might not be getting that support, or there might not be motivation to provide that support. And so that kind of leaves these students in a position where they're set up to fail already. Well, like there's not to harp on that too much, but it affects, this sort of thing would affect everything about their educational journey. If they're not able to advance these courses, they may not be able to graduate or transfer or achieve the goals that they want to achieve as students. Number 3, we were just looking at the principles of community page that we got, and we picked a bunch of them. Obviously, that we could use principles of dignity, equity, respect, empathy to examine this situation. The principles of community in particular provide significant motivation to confront these sorts of issues. That this is the voice that we are supposed to use when we hear people say these sorts of things. We are, in theory, by these principles, committed to pushing back on things that can be seen as harmful, whether they're words or actions. Number 4 was how we could use an equity-minded lens to resolve the scenario. And we did draw back a little bit on, we referred back to, I should say, the principles of community, and went with communication, obviously being able to start and have these difficult conversations with people about what's going on. Empathy, to be able to understand where these thoughts and ideas come from so that we can engage with that individual to, continue the lifelong learning process. Also, we wanted specifically to make data a big part of this, especially because it's already mentioned in there that data was what started this conversation. But data is going to be very important. We can rely on data to tell us what the data is telling us. Now, it may not give us all the answers or all of the story, but we should be able to trust the data that we're seeing. And if we can trust that data, then everything else around that can be built towards a goal. And once we think we've achieved that goal, we can check the data to see if we're actually there. We also had a special note here for milestone guidance, which would be directly for the students to reach their key milestones and be able to receive additional support from, say, something like a counselor or counseling office to direct them in completing those milestones and advancing their educational journey. Last but not least, what actions? And we were thinking about how to address the culture of the faculty, because within the context of the case study, there's probably way more going on there. But within the context of the case study we were reading, the only information we really had there was a faculty response to this discussion that was broadly dismissive, like I said, on a number of angles. And so we thought that probably the most obvious thing to address would be that there is a culture in our faculty, something about our faculty that is part, in this case study, that is part of the entire population, something that is not just, something that just doesn't exist on an individual level, like individuals holding a belief or conviction. And in order to address that, we would suggest a focus on continued education and training, the ability for faculty, staff, administrators, all of us to continue, like I said, our lifelong learning journey to improve ourselves, as well as continue to stress the availability and accuracy of data and our adherence to at least using that data as a measurement for where we are and where we want to be.
So first of all, thank you. That was like more thorough than one would expect. So I appreciate
what was said, right? So we can imagine, we hear these comments all the time. Some of you have heard some similar comments just today, right? And when we don't speak up, and when we don't disrupt those patterns and behaviors in the moment, that's like the best way to do it, right? And we're talking about speaking out of love, speaking out of kindness, speaking out of pursuit of equity and excellence, all those things that group just identified about things that may not happen. They may not be able to complete the courses, to be able to graduate, to get a degree, to transfer. They may not feel seen. They may not have a sense of belonging. They may withdraw from the course. They may, learning may not take place. All of these things can happen if and when we are silent. And we have been silent. I have been silent. I have been complicit. I can think of things that happened just within the last week where I was like, gosh, why didn't I say something, right? And it doesn't mean that I can't. In some of those instances, I have opted to do things on the side, one-on-one. And I realize when you do things one-on-one that other people don't get the benefit of feeling seen, feeling worthy of protection, feeling worthy of being, spoken up for. But then I think, okay, the likelihood that the opportunity will arise again is high. And in that moment, I will be courageous. I will be brave. I will say these things. And I like the way that you talk. It just seems so non-threatening. It just is matter of fact. Like, that's not right. That's not cool. That sounds very dismissive. That could be one simple way to be able to disrupt something. And we don't have to do all the things, but sometimes if you're feeling it, and I always say for me, I know that if my heart starts beating really fast when somebody's talking, I know I'm supposed to say something. If my legs start shaking, I am not supposed to say anything, because somebody's about to feel the wrath of 50 years of stuff that I have dealt with if the leg is shaking. But I know that, but it's when my heart is beating, pay attention, and then say, I'm gonna be courageous here. That sounds very dismissive. You not seeing people as having race, as having gender, as having all of these experiences totally invalidates who they are and what their experience is. So thank you Thank you for your thoroughness, and I know one of the things that we don't specifically ask is how you would disrupt it. But these are things that I need you to think about. In a situation like this, what would you do? And it doesn't have to be super scary. You just say, you basically were like, in theory, that's racism. You know what I mean? So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Did we have one here?
Yeah, what you said about, what would you do in that moment? We had a lot of the same types of things that they talked about. We also have number one, but just one of those comments, the last one, maybe these students are not predisposed to doing well in these courses. Maybe ask right back on, what does not predisposed look like? Unpack that for us. And then what can we do to make them predisposed? What are the support systems that other students might have? And what is it that these predisposed students also might need? And so maybe just having them unpack what that comment means is a way to disrupt.
I love that. And how many of us sometimes we just talking and we don't know what we talk but to now have to explain myself, that's gonna be real tough. And so, because then I would have to say some very racist things, you know what I mean? And sometimes we don't even know where it comes from, And so I like that as a way to disrupt processes.
Tell me what you mean by that. And then how do we fix that? Because there's this thought that I shared before that it talks about in leadership and in certain positions, we sometimes have to take an approach that is all my fault, right? And we know that nothing is all our fault. But when you accept fault for something, it gives you the opportunity space to touch it, to impact it, to do something about it. Because the minute you take no responsibility for it, you absolve yourself and you leave it to somebody else. And that's not what we do here. That's not equity, that is not excellence, that's unacceptable. So anytime we hear somebody putting it off fully on other people and really making them using deficit-minded thinking, we have to disrupt that. We have to. That's not what we're about here with equity and excellence. We are not blaming our students for how they show up in our classes, but we are creating space for them to be people who can be educated, who are worthy of being educated, who have a value and a purpose. Each one of these students that sit in our spaces has a purpose in life, right? You don't know who it is that you are educating and sitting in these classes. Like I love, we just saw a Black woman who is now like a dean or something at USC with, I'm making up stuff now, but there's a story and somebody knows it, right? And she was talking about sitting in our classes at Mesa College. And when she was here, nobody knew that she was going to be named one of the most 100 influential people under that. Like, we didn't know that. And I would love to be able to say, but I educated her as if she was. But many times that's not the experience that we're having. Our students are not feeling like when they come in that room that you see that they have a purpose. And this is the way to get there. And we are not teaching just who they are, but we are teaching who they are becoming. And so we have to create space for them to be seen. And so when people are not seen, when they're being dismissive, we must disrupt. And it will be awkward, but it was awkward when they said it. And so now it's going to be awkward in the direction towards equity and excellence. We're about to all jump in this together. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, everyone. I'll pass out some of the recommendations or comments, and then, again, it's in the text, so if you want to just refer to it, you can.
So we're going to actually get up and move around now. So we're going to go back to our posters. And I want you to, while you're doing this activity, I want you to be thinking about the ability to disrupt, right? So the next activity is at the posters in the middle row, rather. There's a question about barriers and progress stoppers. So as you walked in, you were thinking about all the wonderful work that you've been doing in your spaces in the pursuit of equity and excellence as organized by our 5 Mesa 2030 goals. And now I want you to think about what's getting in the way, right? We can see our data, right? It's not shifting in the way we want it to shift. Right? We know that we are putting our heart and soul into this, and yet something is stopping, right? Something is stopping us from getting to where we want to be. So this is the moment where you're going to take those sticky notes again. Write down those barriers and progress stoppers. And we are going to use those again for our last breakout activity after our break. So we have about 10 minutes, and we'll go ahead and do that now. Yeah. We had a question? So we're going to do the activity and the break, and we will join back in here at 3:50.
Okay, we are going to move into our next activity, so if you all could have a seat. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. All right, 10 seconds. We're going to start. If we can have everybody ready to receive this next portion of our presentation. Thank you all so much for engaging that last portion of our activity. As you all know, Janae passed out sheets of paper that actually has more information in terms of how we might respond to some of the scenarios. I heard a lot of great discussion and dialogue. I am appreciating the what do we call this thing, Post-it notes, the information that is being displayed. So thank you all so much for that. So this next portion of what it is that we're going to do, some of you all have seen this before, but we do know that there's something with repetition that really drives the point home. And so we have a broader audience. And so I'm going to share. And so one of the things that I had shared with you that was really on my heart was just courageous leadership. As soon as I stepped into this position, you hear a lot of things, right? And so part of me just kept thinking, well, I wonder why we're having this barrier. I'm looking at all of us, everybody doing the work, and these are people, we are all people who are committed to equity and excellence. What is happening that we're not able to kind of move forward? And so I know that for me, one of the things that I am constantly asking for and seeking in this role is just courage, wisdom, to be able to do the right thing, right? Not just what feels right for me, but to do what is right for this moment. And I feel so blessed and honored to be serving at this time because I think this is a unique moment in our history, right? With COVID, with the way that the world has responded to some of the racial injustices that have been happening around. They've always been happening, but the world somehow showed up in ways that we had not seen before. And now we have all of this information, so our lives were abruptly disrupted. We knew one thing, and then we had to learn something completely different, right? And just as we were trying to figure out how we get out of reaction mode to really being intentional, and then it was like, okay, good, we're gonna come back, right? And so now we're coming back, but we're not coming back to what we were. We had a whole lot of information now about the world. And so what we are coming back to is not anything that we are familiar with. And we have to be able to open ourselves up to be something that we have never been, but that we know our students need. And that is a scary place to be, especially if you come from a frame of thought where we need to know we're gonna do A, B, C, D, and this is how it's gonna work. We don't know. I don't have those answers for you because we're in the middle of figuring it out. But one of the things that's exciting to me is just this whole notion that we're gonna talk and walk our way to the future together. And it's spaces like this, but in order to do it, we have to have courage. We have to have courage. And so, you're all saying this, I love this, can't get enough of it. So I'm just gonna place this to you because in order for us to be courageous, we have to know what we stand for. We have to know what are those things that are going to allow us to be brave, to be vulnerable. And a part of that is starting with your why. And so I'm gonna show this video in hopes that you will understand why understanding your why in doing this equity and excellence work is so critical. Okay, let's figure out the volume. Thank you.
How do I know? A lot of people think of the phrase, how do I know? They always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? the question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, but blind, but now I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
Okay, so I'm sure you could see why I love that. How do I get this in presentation? Right here? Okay. Sorry. There we go. All right. So when you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose. And when I think about how I want to show up at work, I always think I want to show up as that second version of the song. And when I think about how we are pursuing equity and excellence, I want us to pursue it as that second version of the song. Because the first version is what we talk about, right? It's what we talk about, it's the words, it's the things that we say, we point to the back of the wall, we wear our shirts. But again, that second one is understanding why we do it. And I think that that is important when we think about courageous leadership, because if you can remember that why, when you are in a meeting, when you are in a classroom, when you are overhearing other conversations, it becomes very clear what needs to be done and how we need to show up. And so I love this quote from Martin Luther King. He says, "I stress the need for courageous, intelligent, and dedicated leadership. Leaders of sound integrity. Leaders not in love with publicity, but in love with justice. Leaders not in love with money, but in love with humanity. Leaders who can subject their particular egos to the greatness of the cause. And we have a great cause. Our students, our vision, our mission, our goals, we have a great cause. It is very clear what it is that we need to do, but we have to be courageous in that pursuit. We have to be in love with justice, with humanity, with doing what is right. And so we have to, again, while it is about all of us individually, we are part of a system and a structure. And so we need to impact that at all costs. We need to protect that at all costs. And that takes courage. And so as a leadership team, we talked about courage and we talked about what we thought it meant. And we said courageous leaders have the courage to seek and receive feedback. When is the last time that you worked with your teams to get feedback? When you asked students what they thought? When you asked for people outside of your department, what does this look like to you? What does this feel like to you? And it is intentional, and it is constantly folded into what it is that we do. Courageous leaders have the courage of their convictions. We all know what we stand for. So we have to have the courage of our conviction, of what we believe in. And again, as a college, for equity and excellence. And we need to disrupt. We need to stop. We need to pause. Courageous leaders are prepared to let go of precious practices. And we all have precious practices from 2020 and before. We're gonna have to let some of those go because we know more. Our students know more. They expect more. They have to have the courage to innovate, which I think we do wonderfully, but that takes a lot of courage. You have to have the courage to admit mistakes, right? It could be structural mistakes, the mistakes of, accepting responsibility for all things, even though they're not ours, but then it's okay to make mistakes. That takes vulnerability, it takes courage. You have to be able to challenge yourself to be different and think different. And you can imagine sitting in a room like this at one of your meetings, department meetings, and having a different idea, and everybody is like, no, this is the way that we do it. And it would be real easy to sit and look and say, okay, we'll just do that. But it takes courage to say, you know what? As the leading college of equity and excellence, that's not gonna work. That's not bold enough. It's not courageous enough. That creates boundaries. Like, this sounds great, but let's talk about who this really works for. And is it serving students that are most in need of our support? We have to have the courage to have difficult conversations, which is what we are practicing today. And I think as we practice them, we understand that they are not as difficult sometimes as we think if we just put it out there. And we don't put it out there because we know how things are going to end. We put it out there because it is the right thing to do, and then we figure out how to keep showing up and how to keep moving in the direction that is going to support our students, that's going to support our community, that's going to allow people to be seen, and having the courage to step out of unproductive or unhelpful situations. And so as a leadership team, we were able to kind of unpack these, and this is where we ask the question, where do we struggle the most? And pretty much all of us said having the courage to have difficult conversations. And so again, that's what this is about. Because we want to empower you, we want you to have courage, and we want to all be talking about the same thing so that none of you all think that you are doing this alone. Like, if you look, there's an entire village who, when we leave here, should have your back in terms of being courageous. Because sometimes we are afraid to do it because I might put myself out there and I might not get any support. Nobody's gonna say something. They might send me an email afterwards and say, that was really cool what you said. We're always thinking like, why did you say something then? Like, I felt so alone. I felt so, you know what I mean? And sometimes we have to say, yeah, next time. You know what I mean? But we have to be able to call each other out on that. So that's what today is about. And I love this quote. This was from Robert Gates, who's former defense secretary, and he was saying that we have to have the courage to chart a new course. The courage to do what is right and not just what is popular. The courage to stand alone. The courage to act. The courage to speak truth to power. And I love this part because he says, the time will inevitably come when you must stand alone. When you must say, this is wrong, or I disagree with you. And because I have the responsibility, this is what we will do. Like, can you imagine if we showed up in spaces like that? Like, that's wrong. That's not what we do here. That's not how we talk to each other. There's a different way that we can, we're not calling people out all the time. We're calling people into conversations so that we can work together, so that we can talk and walk our way into the future. And so we have to be able to do this. And why? I don't think anyone in this room wants to live life of regret. That when you are tired, retiring, or when you move on, that you say, man, I wish I would have spoken up for this policy, for this practice. I wish I would have said something about how we could literally have innovated and done things differently and caused more students to succeed. No regrets. We want to be able to solve problems, and if we are not talking about them, we can't solve them. If we can't name it, we can't do anything about it. We want to be able to protect others. We are all at different stages of this journey. People are watching. And when we don't speak up, and when we don't say things, we are telling people what we think of them. And we want to make sure that we can speak for those who don't often have voice. We want to avert disasters. We want to make sure that we have opportunities, that we are being innovative, and that we are leaving a legacy. When we leave here, I want people to be able to say, man, over at Mesa, they are bold. They are courageous. Like, they passionately pursue equity and excellence. Like, I said this one thing and they caught me right away. No, we don't talk like this. Or maybe you should rephrase that. Or maybe, maybe that sounds a bit dismissive. Maybe we can rephrase that. Can you help me understand what you mean? And it's not out of anger. It's all out of love. It is all out of love. And we want to continue to grow. And so courageous leadership is not comfortable. You will not feel comfortable doing this. This is not easy. A lot of times when we think about who are our courageous people, we often put people on a pedestal and we think that they are born with this courage. That's Gandhi, Mother Teresa, you know what I mean? Like, these are courageous people. No, you're courageous. You're courageous. It is not this gene or trait that individual people are born with. It is people who make daily choices, who practice, who work at it. And so a lot of times people don't see that work and think that that's how just people were born. She's born that way. No, no. She, he, they practice it on a day-to-day basis. And so you're gonna fall, you're gonna skin your knee, but courage is contagious. And so every time we choose courage, we make everyone else around us a little bit better and the world a little braver. And as leaders, we need to work out our own version of courage. Mine may look different from yours. We do not compare. You kind of build, in the book that we're reading, you build your courage ladder, it's yours. Take those individual steps that get you where you want to be. And then you have to strive to stay and grow in that space. And the last thing is, if not you, if you are not choosing courage, then who? And if not now, then when? So we are the ones that we have been waiting for when it comes to courage. Our students need us to be courageous. Your colleagues need you to be courageous, and talk about it. In our administrative team meetings, one of the ways that we open up now is, how have you been courageous? Like, let's talk about it. What did it feel like? Was it scary? Was it odd? Was it cool? Like, it just kind of demystifies like some of the things that we need to do. So I will continue to talk about courage in the spaces that I occupy. I will continue to encourage you all to be brave in the spaces that you occupy. But today really is just about planting that seed so that we're all moving in the same direction. And when you see it happening, let somebody know, like, that was courageous, that was bold, that was brave, thank you. Let's call it out, let's name it, let's do it, let's be it. And we're gonna have the opportunity to do that a little bit more with our next session.
So we are gonna have that opportunity right now. So I'm gonna have one person from every table stand up. Just go ahead, look, make eye contact with your table, and be like, yeah, look at me. Go ahead, yeah. 3, 2, 1, you have someone standing. That person, I want you to, the person who's standing, I'd like you to go to the back wall and pick 2 sticky notes in the barriers column and bring them back to your table. Whatever your heart desires, but we're focusing on the barriers. And once you've picked those 2 sticky notes, you can make your way back to the table. You got about 5 more seconds. I know it's a hard decision. Okay, so on each of your tables, there's a handout. There's a package of handouts for crucial conversations. Dr. Hans shared with the administrative group a reading list, and she gave us some books, and one of those books was Crucial Conversations. And it talks a lot about how we have conversations in this space where emotions are strong, opinions are divergent, and stakes are high, right? And we are often in these types of situations. So we're going to practice these skills together. So with those 2 barriers that your generous teammate just brought back to the table, you're going to be using that Crucial Conversations handout as your guide, and you're going to discuss how the barrier or progress stopper impacts your work, right? How does it impact your work? We're going to spend the first half of our breakout talking about how it impacts your work, and then the next, what solutions can you think of to help build momentum, to advance progress, to move beyond that barrier? And I want us to focus very much on the things that we can control, right? What is in our scope of influence? As Dr. Hans mentioned earlier, we want to own all of it, right? We want to be able to touch it. If we push it onto someone else, then it means we can absolve ourselves of responsibility. And then we're just not going to get a lot out of this next 15 minutes. So, again, Crucial Conversations handout, discussing how the barriers of progress stoppers impact your work, and then what solutions can you think of to move towards, to build momentum, advance progress, and move towards, over those barriers. All right, go ahead.
Okay, we have 4 minutes, and we are going to use them wisely. So if I can get everybody's attention, I don't know if this made it to the side. Okay, so 4 minutes, and what I want to do is just kind of, we're at the end, we just have a wrap up. Are there things that you all are thinking of that we would like to put out in this space? Just where are you now with what we just did, and what this could potentially mean for the future, AKA when you get back to your office, when you check an email. Like, what are some thoughts about what just happened today? Was this easy? Was it difficult? Was it necessary? Was it unnecessary? Does it cause fear, excitement? Yes.
What I shared with my group was I feel like I jumped in the pool naked in cold water. That's how I feel. But don't visualize.
I don't even know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that. But thank you, Eileen. Thank you. Okay. Courtney, sorry.
We were rapidly uncovering those difficult conversations that maybe we would want to avoid under other circumstances. The kinds of things that when we say it, it can make somebody uncomfortable.
And I think that's really important because that's probably the kind of conversations we need to have. If in this short discussion we're coming up with so many of these topics that we're like, wait a minute, I wouldn't have shared this with other people or not before now. Maybe that's something to consider too, that there's a lot of things we're not talking about collectively that we maybe should be.
I love you. Thank you. And good night. I mean, I love that. I love you. Love that. Love that. That's good.
I think to piggyback off what Courtney was saying, the small groups really help. Sometimes in a very large setting, to be able to be courageous is difficult. But here together with people that we can chit chat with beforehand or after, it was a lot easier to kind of get into some more of those difficult conversations.
Thank you. Yes.
I really appreciate the materials. I'm planning for what I anticipate to be a crucial conversation soon, and there's a lot that I plan to take from this, the concrete suggestions and steps. I think those will be very helpful.
I love that. Good. Yes.
I want to talk about a lot of things. One of the post-its that I had picked was lack of mandatory training, especially when you're talking about these kinds of crucial conversations. And I mean, I look around the room and sometimes you see the same people in those spaces, right? And so how do we bring those conversations to those that either you can't get in the room, you can't get them to sign up for things, for whatever reasons, right? So, and I liked when I said to you, the small, we talk not only about small spaces and conversations, but small digestible items. Like, 3, 4, 5 hour trainings on equity is even if you've done it several times, it's not, sometimes we lose our attention. So, we just talked about how can we maybe create those spaces, go to places where people are already, right? Go to the meetings and bring these little digestible pieces of the conversation so that hopefully it can kind of grow from there.
And that's where we have agency, right? So for all of the people who were invited to this retreat, have agency with committees, have agency with departments, have agency, you have agency. And so if we're talking about where do we bring those and how do we reach them, you start with where you are. You start with your group. You start with your meetings. You find ways to make these be institutionalized and things that we talk about regularly and often. So I appreciate that. It is 4:31. We are getting ready to send you off. And so one of the things that we know when we usually send people off, we say, be safe, right? I want you all to be bold. I want you all to be courageous. I want you all to have the courage of your convictions. I want you all to get into and start some good trouble. I want you to do what is right for our students. And I want you to do it all through the lens of equity and excellence. So I thank you all for engaging us today. This is just the beginning. We have just hopped into the pool, clothed or unclothed. We are in the pool, people. and so now we must decide what we do with it. And if we think back to what we talked about earlier, it is the pause, right? It's that space between how it is that we are reacting and how it is that we respond. It's that space. Let's exist in that space and let's choose what we will do. Let us choose what we will do because there is power in that choice. And so I thank you all. I have 4 Equity Talk to Equity Walk books up here. I know that many of you have them already, so if you have them, great. If you don't and you really want to dig into a little bit more about how it is that you can work through some of the scenarios that were presented, we'd be happy to share these with you. We may have a few more, but if you want, we have some up here. So thank you. Continue the conversation. Go be bold and be courageous leaders at Mesa.